Hello and welcome back to the channel, guys. You meet me in the Audi A4 that I had just detailed. I just uploaded that video. You can check it out right over here. I'm going to the shop right now to work on the boat. We're almost done with it. We have a couple seals left to do, and when we're done with those seals, the propeller goes back into the boat. We might start the motor on the boat, and then we can finally start working on the interior. I'm really excited, and you'll meet me at the shop.
And here it is, the propeller that I was talking about earlier. But this isn't actually called a propeller. This is called a sterndrive. That's right, I learned a lot about boats, and I can tell you right now that the boat is a stern-driven boat, which means the engine sits inboard like you see over here, but the sterndrive, which is propelling the boat, sits at the end of the stern. And that right there, that's called a transom that my dad has his phone resting, learning how to install the sterndrive. But unable to install the sterndrive, there are a couple things that need to be done first, and that is a massive bearing that needs to be replaced. There is a huge bearing that sits inside the transom, and that needs to be replaced because it's basically weathered sitting in there this whole entire time. So dad got a tool from Amazon and able to replace this bearing, and on top of that, it also works as an alignment tool for the bearing. So we shouldn't have any problems slotting the sterndrive's shaft inside the transom, which goes directly into the engine. But as you can see here, it's not a direct straight shot, so we're gonna have to do a little bit of work to get that in there.
I got it. It looks like it's inside. Literally had to have the phone like this. That's what the angle was. No, it's fine. It looks like it's inside right now.
So, let's see. So that thing is supposed to go all the way in.
Oh, that's in. The plate goes in first. Perfect. And then this. Okay, now we work on that. Vice grips, and just clamp that on, and then we'll twist it out.
Now it's working on.
It's gotten a lot easier.
Of course, the longer is the,
No, like it's
it's getting out.
like I could do it with the finger now.
Okay, so now you can remove that tool and now slowly pull the whole thing out. Watch it. There you go.
Oh wow, look at that.
Alright, that thing's a little disgusting, but now with that bearing out, it's time for us to get the new bearing and install that in the transom. The first thing is we need to make sure that this bearing sits inside the transom the correct way. If you guys notice, on the new bearing, you'll see two little notches on both sides of the inner ring. And the reason for those two holes is so you can directly apply grease inside the bearing through the porthole in the transom.
The alignment tool, and then there's another tool that it's installing. No, that's the alignment installing tool. The one that you have.
Now with everything we need to install the bearing, we got to make sure that the whole entire transom and the engine line up. And enabled to do that, we're going to use the stick itself as an alignment tool. And the way it's supposed to work is when you put that stick inside the engine, it will go straight into the engine where the shaft would go. If there's any sort of resistance in that process, there are going to be problems with the shaft going inside the engine.
This bearing, this side is toward the engine.
Yeah.
And this tool that supports the bearing so it doesn't damage. Shaft goes behind it, and once it's aligned, you can just hit it slowly and it goes all the way in.
All right, let's put it in.
Okay, now installing the bearing was pretty easy. All we had to do was just make sure everything lines up and then hammer the end of the stick in, and then it slid right in. And now with the bearing installed, it's time for us to use the alignment tool to see if that bearing and the hole in the engine for the shaft to fit in fits smoothly. And again, the alignment tool should go in pretty deep without any resistance. Our next step was to do a little bit of maintenance on the transom. The shifter linkage needed to be replaced with all the stuff that we got from the kit. So we started taking apart that whole entire assembly and started to lubricate the new parts and installing it back together. We also replaced the shift linkage with the brand new one that came inside the kit. Our next step was to clean the mating surface to make sure that the gasket sits pretty nice and flush. And with the old gasket still being stuck on this face, it took us a little bit of time to clean it up. Once it was all cleaned up, it was time for us to figure out what our next step was, and we didn't know it at the time, but our next step was to actually put the Sterndrive and mate it to the actual boat.
So I just replaced the gaskets right over here, 3 of them, all replaced brand new, and we're basically ready to go ahead and install this. However, we are anticipating a problem that this might not align properly because it just doesn't look like it slides in correctly. I'm hopeful that it will. Only one way to find out.
Before we install the Sterndrive, we have to first install the bolts for the motor mounts to line up the engine and the transom together. Oddly enough, there's an order in which you install the bolts into the motor mounts. In between the transom and the engine sits a spring washer that's surrounded by a rubber washer. Once that's sandwiched between the transom and the motor mount, it's time to move on to the bolt. The spacer goes in under the washer, and then you put the bolt through that and then the nut under it to tighten it. It's a weird way to install a motor mount, but I guess it works. Once installed the bolts, it's time for us to retest the alignment tool to see if it slides in any more smoothly. But we didn't do that. We actually tried to install it without even testing if the alignment tool slides in correctly and smoothly. We just went ahead, tried to push it in, and both my dad and I were stumped. We watched videos on YouTube, and a lot of people were saying online that this thing should just slide in. So we tried for an hour, and mind you, it's 7 o'clock at night. After trying for a whole entire hour, we couldn't get it to slide in. So we ended up calling it a night, and we picked up things the following morning.
So it's now day 4 of us working on the boat. Dad's opening up the propeller right now. I think he wants to take it out so we can safely remove this without damaging the propeller. We figured out the cause as to why this isn't sliding in properly. After further research, Dad said that we need to use this alignment tool a little bit more to align it correctly, so when that goes in, this will slide in. He is doing weight reduction. Oh, it's got weight to it. So that should just slip in and go in all the way. Okay, now take it out.
But we still couldn't figure it out. We fit the alignment tool in there, everything lined up, but it didn't fit. But fortunately for us, my dad's next door neighbor is a boat mechanic. He's worked on these things a handful of times, and he knows exactly how to slide this in there. So he came in to help us out a little bit, but even he was stuck as to why it wasn't going in. He kept on saying it should slide in, a good kick should slide it in, and it just didn't happen. So both Dad and I were stumped. The whole day we were trying to figure out what was putting it off center, until I threw out a crazy theory. Dad, what if, since you replaced that whole entire block of wood, maybe that's throwing it off? Because when we were installing the transom, that was having a hard time sliding incorrectly due to the studs getting stuck in certain part. Maybe it's not aligned correctly. Maybe something is just not correctly sitting and it's just preventing it from sliding in, or something along the lines of that. And he said, and I quote, "No, we installed the bearing wrong." So he spent 4 hours trying to figure out whether or not the bearing was installed correctly or not. And when we realized that the bearing wasn't the issue, it was the alignment of the actual block of wood, the engine, transom, he said, "I'm taking the engine out." So we took the engine out. By removing the engine, this completely eliminated what felt like we were getting stuck on. I guess my theory was right. The alignment of the block of wood my dad replaced shifted everything and prevented it from being perfectly aligned. Now that the Sterndrive is installed and bolted, we can fit the engine back in easily. We just need to slide the shaft into the engine and ensure the holes for the motor mounts align.
And now all we have to do is put the motor back in, which is what Dad's gonna do. It should slide in, but we're gonna go ahead and see if we can do it in 10 minutes. Timer starting now. Hey guys, Tamim from the future here. I can tell you right now, it was just under 15 minutes. I don't know how to install a timer on my videos, but if you look over here, 14:59, if I hit it. Timer starting now. Okay, and then over here, 14:59. How long was that? 15 minutes. Not 10 minutes, but 15 minutes, and the engine is in. So the engine is now in there. Everything is connected. The whole entire drivetrain is connected, but we're still wiggling around a little bit. We're gonna mount the motor mounts. Everything is gonna be sitting back together the way it was when we came in here this morning. But this time we have the bottom portion, the bell housing fully installed onto the boat. And that just leaves what for tomorrow? A bunch of wiring connecting this whole entire thing to the boat. We can start it up tomorrow. It is now the next day, and we are currently in the process of putting all the cables and cords back together on the boat. Dad's going through his phone trying to find all old pictures of how the cables sit in this thing. So we're gonna go ahead, finish that up, and then probably start it up. I don't know, what do you think? With Dad's subtle nod of approval, we went to work. By using old pictures as a guide to put everything back together, it was actually quite easy. I was working on the port side while Dad was working on the starboard side, which was great because there was a crazy connector that Dad basically had to redo all the cables and even put in a fuse, which honestly came out better than what was originally on the boat. And this took up a majority of our day, just trying to figure out what goes where. Eventually, everything that needed to be connected to start this motor up was connected. After that, I started working on some of the hardware, such as this. It's the boat's exhaust, and it got completely rusted out. I don't know exactly what goes inside this tube. I'm assuming it's a mix of gas in the inner chamber and water in the outer chamber, given how rusted it is inside. But I basically sanded this whole entire surface down so we can install it into the motor, which took a bit of time. After we installed the exhaust, our next step was actually our last step, which was to add some oil to the engine and connect the terminals to a battery so we could finally start up the motor after 5 years of it sitting. Well, not actually start up, because the fuel lines aren't connected, so we are going to be using starter fluid just to get this engine to crank on its own. Ooh. If both Dad and I weren't so tired from working on this engine all day, we would have been cheering. Now that the motor started on its own, there are a few things that need to be installed, such as a fuel pump and a couple other stuff that we'll get into in the next episode. I will say that it's crazy to see that a boat that's been sitting in my dad's shop for 5 years finally make some progress, and I think you guys will be amazed as to what happens in next week's episode. I can tell you right now, that boat is seeing some water. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please leave a like if you are new to the channel and want to see more content like this, especially when it comes to cars. Please subscribe because I have some amazing content coming soon. All the recording, scripting, editing is done by me. And if you have any questions regarding this project or anything you want to share, feel free to comment. I love responding to comments on here. But that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one.